All right, let's dive into this game. It's important to note this is again a blitz game, so let's not judge the players too harshly. The game starts off with e4, and white is threatening to conquer the center of the chessboard with these two pawns. So black usually stops this by either playing pawn to e5, or in this game, pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense. This is guarding that square. If we were to do that move anyway, they would take us and we'd be more or less compelled to bring our queen out too early, and then they could poke our queen right there, and we basically lost a free turn. So by playing c5, black does stop us from playing d4 immediately. White played knight f3. The idea of this move is to simply get ready to castle. As we can see, now this is opened. There's only one piece in between the king and the rook instead of two. And of course, the knight is going to be well placed, aiming towards the center there. Black can play the Sicilian in many different ways. In this game, they played knight to c6. In other games, they can play d6 or e6 or g6. The Sicilian is a very large and flexible opening, and probably that's why a lot of people play it. In the game, black played knight c6. It is really clamping down on that square, and of course, in a simpler sense, it is developing one of the unused pieces. Now, white really has two ways to play this position. The most common way, and probably the best way, is to try to play d4, what they call the open Sicilian. The idea why we might want to play d4 is that we have a partial lead in development. Even though we have both the knights out, our bishop is already half developed, as opposed black's bishops are completely blocked. So when you have a lead in development, you're traditionally supposed to trade the pawns, which opens the position, hopefully in favor for your slightly more developed pieces. So by opening the position or trading the pawns, that's white is following this classical idea. And that's actually what happens in this game, d4. The other option is more positional way to play the position, which is simply to develop a piece with bishop to b5. Anyway, in the game they played d4, the most common move, and both sides are happy. Black is going to happily take our center pawn. Notice they're taking it with a flank pawn, a slightly not centered pawn, and when they take us, they're happy that they've destroyed our center pawn with just this flank pawn. On the other hand, white is happy that we wanted to open the position, and now we've done it. Right, our bishops are already kind of half developed. They can move on the very next turn, and black will still have to spend some time to even prepare to develop the bishops. And with that regard, or with that in mind, black played the move pawn g6. That's a way to get that bishop into the game on the longest diagonal. Again, black had a lot of other options that they could have played, but this is a very reasonable approach. Some other options could include attacking this pawn with knight to f6. See, our pawn is not protected. And of course, we could easily protect it. One thing we wouldn't want to fall for, though, is trying to attack the knight with our pawn like this. Of course, not right now, because they would take it. But by removing that defender first, and then going after the pawn, is a very common blunder that white sometimes plays at, the super beginner level. Obviously, these players wouldn't fall for this silly trick, but yeah, who can find black's double attack? And actually, white is going to lose a pawn here. Give you a second to find it. Yes, and black only has to find queen to a5. No need to move the pawn or the knight from the pawn's attack, because they're just going to double attack us and say thanks for the pawn. So of course, white would never fall for that. And instead, if knight f6 was ever played, right, attacking our e4 pawn, we could simply just protect it with the knight. Okay, instead, as we said, in the game they played g6, trying to get that bishop out to the long diagonal. Makes a lot of sense. And now white has two choices on how to proceed. The first choice, in my opinion, is they could go for the Meroxy bind, with these two pawns effectively kind of getting and cementing white's space advantage. These pawns are quite advanced. They're already kind of leaking into, this is 1-4's our territory, the white side. We already see these pawns will be leaking into black's territory. Very slow way to play the position, because on the downside, this pawn isn't a developing move, right? In fact, it inhibits the development of the bishop. But that would be one way to play, a very solid and slow way to play. In the game, instead, they go for bishop to e3. Very solid move, very nice move. It, of course, is developing the pieces, and perhaps white is going to be aiming against the Fian Kd8 bishop by, at some point in the somewhat distant future, to go queen d2 and bishop h6 and try to eliminate supposedly this very strong and powerful bishop on g7. Like we said, it will be on the long diagonal. Maybe if we go queen d2 and bishop h6, we could knock it out. Obviously, that would be way in the future, as right now it wouldn't be safe to do that idea. So perhaps that's what white is going for with bishop to e3, bishop g7. Black has to get ready to castle, and moving the bishop is preparing to do so. And of course, again, that's a very nice diagonal for the bishop. All right, we should probably either make a Meroxy bind or develop our pieces. In the game, they went for knight c3. Good move. And black should either play d6 to develop that bishop. It would also block kind of any pawn movements in the future from our e4 pawn. Or they could play, as they played in the game, knight f6, simply getting ready to castle. Okay, in the game they chose knight f6, good move. And now white played bishop c4. Also a good idea, because it's simply getting ready to castle perhaps. And also, just developing the bishop. Maybe there's an eye on the f7 pawn, but we don't really have any way to, increase the attackers. It's not a legal move to go over here. So it's mostly about just developing the pieces. One question, though, before we play the move bishop c4 is, should we do it? Is there a tactic with knight takes e4, and then d5, getting the piece back? Before we play bishop c4, we need to make sure that knight takes e4 doesn't work. What do you guys think? Does this move work for white, or are we losing to knight e4? And then again, of course, knight e4, and then the d5 move. What do you think? Yeah, and that's right. We actually can play bishop c4. This knight takes e4 trick, of course, probably wouldn't be considered by players of this level, but it's important to note that sometimes this idea actually does work for black, and then boom, they get their kind of sacrificed knight right back, and they would have destroyed our very important center pawn. The reason it doesn't work here for black is that we have this nice counterattack, bishop to b5. If you notice, the pawn on d7 was one of the two protectors for the knight, and as soon as that pawn is pushed, now there's only one protector, and we can kind of exploit that by going bishop to b5, and we have a double attack on the knight. And of course, they already sacrificed the knight. Black sacked that knight over here, so they probably would have to get their knight back, and we can get our material back by taking. Obviously, they'll take back, and the point is we have this double attack. They'll block it, you take the rook, and yes, they can take you back, but obviously we won a $5 rook for a $3 bishop, and of course white would be doing, white would just be winning here. in the long run anyway. Okay, so white probably saw that, probably knew that would be a relatively easy idea for white to find. Considering how well white played this game, I assume he's quite a strong player. Yeah, so he just played bishop c4, not worried about any of this nonsense little tricks, since we just saw they don't work at all. And of course, black's not going to fall for that either. Instead, she simply castles. Great move. Can't really complain about castling. And here, white decides to castle as well, which is a little bit interesting. Usually, we'd like to go for this queenside castling, but perhaps it's a little bit slow because knight g4 would simply trap our bishop. Our bishop cannot go anywhere because if it does move, our knight is hanging. Maybe I'll want to take it with the knight. Right, the bishop was a protector of our knight, and so we can't move it. And therefore, we just don't have time to play queen d2 because our knight will be trapped. Our bishop will be trapped by the knight. Not losing, of course, but it'd be a little bit of a problem if white were to lose bishops for just for the cheaper valued piece, the knight. So of course, none of that happened. White just castled. Good move. And black played pawn to d6. Makes sense. It's getting that bishop potentially ready to be developed, probably eventually on e6. And of course, it is stopping any pawn advances, which sometimes could happen if white decided to, right, say, eliminate this knight, we take back, and then we could try to advance. Be a little bit of an interesting idea. Anyway, black just shuts that down by playing d6. And now white actually plays the first small mistake of the game. Again, it's a rapid game. They're playing pretty well already, so it's only human to make some small mistake, such as queen to d2. What is the downside to queen d2? Because, of course, the upside is, well, we're connecting the rooks. How could that be bad? Maybe we're getting ready for, right? We said this idea of playing bishop h6 at some point. Right now, the knight is moved, so now maybe we can do it. But take a second and try to find the small drawback of playing queen to d2. Yeah, and indeed, it is a very small drawback, but maybe an important one. And here they could, again, trap our bishop. Our queen is actually blocking our escaping squares backwards. And, of course, we can't move the bishop to safety because, again, the bishop was one of the two protectors for that knight. And they're two attackers, so they would just say, what? You lost your piece. Obviously, that wouldn't happen in the real game. So after knight g4, a more reasonable move like, moving the piece out of harm's way or whatever, and then they will just take our bishop. And bishops are worth slightly more than knights, so black would be definitely for choice here. So perhaps after queen d2, right, is a good idea, connecting these rooks, but just slightly mistimed because it allows knight to g4. So maybe white should prepare the idea to play queen d2. How would you prepare to play queen d2? Yeah, that's right. We have a few ways to stop knight g4, which is sort of the problem with queen d2. We can simply play h3. I'm not really a big fan of this move, but it gets the job done. Right now, they won't ever put their knight on g4 because you just take it. And the other way that I would prefer, don't know if it's better, but I would prefer to play bishop e2, and then when I move it, knight g4 is going to be a bit harder to play because, right, obviously we're protecting this square. And I prefer bishop e2 over h3, although again, both are good moves, because for beginners especially, we shouldn't push the pawns in front of our king, as anytime you push the pawn, it can't go backwards, and there's sort of this little hole that is created. In this case, I don't see how black would ever exploit that hole, but just for beginners, we really should try to avoid pushing our pawns if there are other ways to meet any problems. So that's all. Okay, in the game, Queen D2 is played. Critical blunder something? No, not even a little bit, but still, maybe knight G4 is an equalizing idea for black. Okay, in the game, black decided to simply develop a piece, Queen A5. There were 3 pieces that weren't developed, and of course, going bishop hunting sounds nice, but you are neglecting your development as you move your knight twice. Probably, especially in a speed game, you might be reluctant to do that. And Queen A5 is definitely a nice idea, just developing the queen. And, right, Rook D1 is, Rook D8 is maybe coming in the future. It's a standard move in the Sicilians where you can play Queen A5 to develop your queen. No one can easily harass the queen over there. Of course, like Knight B3, but just retreat. Wasn't like a really important harassment of the queen. And in fact, that's what happens here. The Knight B3 is played. Yes, they force you to move your queen twice, which is a little bit sad. But on the other hand, they've moved their knight, 1, 2, 3 times. And is the knight really doing very much on B3? I don't know. But it is a good move anyway, because it decreases the queen's activity at the cost of decreasing the knight's activity on D4. Let's say it's just a very equal position, balanced for both sides. Here, white played pawn to F3, which is an interesting move. It really protects this pawn. Look at that nice pawn chain at the cost of a little bit of damage to the house here. Not a huge fan of playing F3, but objectively, it's a good move. It, especially in these speed games, keeping everything connected avoids any, silly blunders. So both sides are playing well. Black plays 95. The threat is quite obvious. Your bishop is under attack. In fact, it's under attack twice, if that wasn't enough. Obviously, we're going to save the bishop, and there's only one square to save the bishop that's safe. I guess you could say bishop b5 is safe, but it'd just be attacked. So, okay, bishop b2. And now black plays bishop to e6. His bishop was not developed. Where to develop the bishop? There's not too many promising squares. These pawns are really blocking a lot of the bishop's potential. Obviously, this one's guarded. And, okay, well, we can only go d7 or e6. e6 is sort of a natural square in these sort of dragon-esque Sicilians. And we see that there's a lot of control on the c4 square. And bishop e6 is just furthering control on that square. A good move. At the same time, black is simply developing the pieces. Knight d4, great idea. The knight was slightly misplaced on b3, although it did so for the idea to misplace a little bit black's queen. So let's say it's a balanced idea. And of course, there's a tempo on the bishop, which compels black to play bishop c4 to not lose the bishop for the knight. And that's why she played the bishop c4 in the game. Makes a lot of sense. Still, both sides are playing really well, especially considering the time control. I'm actually impressed by both players. They're both, showing their strength. Let's see how the game proceeded. Rook Fd1 was played. Definitely a sign that that maybe white is running out of ideas. Maybe. To be fair, it looks like a reasonable move. So let's just continue. they played bishop takes c2. Well, at some point, maybe b3 is going to come and kick away the bishop anyway. So this move makes sense. It also somewhat compels white to break this queen and bishop battery that they've had going. I don't know if taking backwards, and that knight is so well placed, going backwards might be even worse than moving the queen out of the way. And of course, maybe here knight c4 might be a problem as well. So for those kind of reasons, we have to take with the right. And of course, this way is also met by knight c4. We're gonna lose our bishop for a knight, which is slightly bad. So anyway, queen takes c2. Yes, we lose this battery. A little bit sad. So again, maybe rook f to d1 wasn't the best move. It's a speed game. Still, the position is definitely playable for both sides. Okay, knight c4, harassing our bishop again. We should probably save it. In the game, a different good move was played. Rook a to b1. Of course, the knight was not only attacking her pawn, or the bishop is also attacking her pawn, and rook b1 is protecting it. I'm not entirely sure why black doesn't just take the bishop. The bishop is worth a little bit more than the knight, so I believe black should have done this. And another reason that black should maybe trade, following kind of very beginner principles, is that black has a lack of space. If we see these pawns are like most of black's pieces are kind of bunched up in just these first 3 rows relative to black's starting position. So when you have less space, your pieces are a bit cramped, you're advised to trade pieces, make fair trades whenever possible. So I don't really see why this move wasn't played. That being said, I think, you know, it could be a problem where it could be a problem where maybe she didn't want to trade pieces against a player who you know, maybe at least probably would be lower rated than her. And, you know, it might be the best move, it might not be, but maybe she's going for this idea that she doesn't want to trade against a, you know, quote unquote weaker player. I think at that moment in the video, it was still a little bit unclear if the kid was overrated, really, you know, highly rated or whatever, because he was, I believe, only kind of giving out these online ratings, which are a little bit hard to pin down if they're ever accurate or not. So maybe that's what provoked her to not trade. But again, I assume she would trade if she had known her opponent was quite so strong. Yeah, because it just follows the basic principles. Anyway, she played knight to d7. And that's definitely just a mistake. And one that's provoked by, you know, lack of time, and also it's a friendly game. Maybe you're not quite on your, you know, you're not like sensing danger sometimes when you're, you know, just playing for fun. On the other hand, what else could she have done? And for our beginners out here, what do you think about knight takes b2? Is that a good move for black to play, with the idea that if they take it back, is black able to get the knight back? What do you think? Should black play knight takes b2? Good move or blunder? Yes, and that's right. It is a terrible blunder to play this move, because we're not playing checkers. White doesn't have to take us back and fall for this beginner idea. Instead, instead white will simply just move the knight with tempo, and then of course, sadly, your knight is still hanging, and the knight is not gonna fall. So this would be simply the loss of a piece. Perhaps we'd have to throw in knight b3 first, but it doesn't really make a difference. Eventually, the black will simply lose a piece for free. So luckily, black didn't fall for that mistake. Instead, they played, or I guess sadly, they played a different mistake. They played knight to d7. It's a little bit hard to know what exactly the idea here is. Perhaps it's going to reload this piece. Perhaps it's simply opening the bishop up. I'm not sure. But in any case, there's some pretty big flaws with this move, and white has a winning shot, which was missed in the game. So maybe we can find how to improve. Take a second. What would you play for white? Yeah, white actually has quite a few good moves, but only knight d5 is absolutely killer. The queen is under attack, and the queen needs to be babysitting this pawn, but also this pawn is under attack, which will even come with a check. Notice that the knight on f6 was a great defender of this knight hopping to d5 whole idea. And then again, this queen is poking this. And I think there's just no way to save all the pieces here. Maybe knight takes e3 was... No, knight takes e3 would be a terrible move because the queen is still hanging. Maybe it'd be time to resign, I guess, here. All I can see is that I guess we're just losing a free piece. So that would be game over. Instead of playing knight to d5, which is just winning on the spot, white plays a secondary move, which is also quite strong. So considering the speed of the game, it's definitely understandable that white, saw a good move and then just played it immediately. I'm sure in a classical time control, he would have, found knight d5 and won faster. But in these speed games, it's really hard to justify not playing a good move when you first see it. It's because you have a good advantage and you want to save your time on the clock. So okay, knight comes here. Obviously, is a tempo on the queen, and it's getting a little bit hard for this queen to keep babysitting this knight. So in the game, queen c8 was played, keeping an eye on the knight, and obviously dodging this. But yeah, this is too passive. Notice that white has developed all the pieces off the starting square, and somehow black is, I don't know, technically the queen moved off the starting square, but it's just a little bit... you don't really usually want your queen tied down to the defense of a piece, and obviously the rook would have preferred to be doing that. But, here we are. In the game, maybe white could have brought it home a little bit faster by playing knight to d5. It's attacking this, and, if you protect it with the rook, then the knight is simply coming to here, supported by his brother on d5, and it's just kind of over. I guess we could consider if bishop f6 is played. Well, I guess at the very least you could just take this pawn and just look at all these arrows and stuff coming in. The knight is... actually don't see a way to save the knight, and okay, it's just a disaster. Anyway, in the game, white again went for the second best move, but to be honest, it's a speed game, and it's really hard to not play just a winning move. Like, it's really hard to find the best move when, like, okay, there's just a free pawn. And so he just took the free pawn. Of course, the knight is protected by the bishop. And, well, the only way to kind of play this position involves the sacrifice of this rook here, with the idea that maybe this bishop will be a bit trapped. Right? There's some ideas that sometimes it'll be trapped, and so maybe there'll still be a game here if rook takes a7 had been found. Sadly, though, in the game, there was a kind of touch move issue, and b6 was sort of played, and then as the move was being played, Black realized that, oh wait, my queen is hanging. I should probably not do this move, but you know, so, and it's kind of unclear what the rules are in these kind of blitz, in these unrated, just kind of for fun blitz tournaments, or you know, just games. I mean, it's not even a tournament. You know, is touch move enforced? If you guys didn't kind of agree upon it, anyway, to avoid all these problems, she just decided, all right, I'll just allow the queen to be taken. Even though it definitely there could have been an argument that we didn't agree to touch move rule. You know, I don't have to do it unless I've hit my clock, and she did not hit her clock when b6 was played. So I'm not sure, but anyway, this was unfortunately the last real part of this game. The rest is just White converting his huge advantage, and he really did it kind of flawlessly, or at least very close to flawlessly. The knight hops in, threatening knight e7, which would be a nice little fork. Obviously, that is stopped by protecting the pawn. And then I just really like this kind of cleanup of just, okay, how could I possibly mess up? Well, there's this knight in my base, right? This is 1-4. This knight's kind of the invader. Just go away, knight. Just get on my base. Okay, and sadly, maybe this is the best option, but every trade is good for White because they're just up by so much material. And there's not much to say about the next moves. Just the knight comes back, is attacking b6. She protected the pawn with the rook. If you can see this, protected. Knight to e3. I'm not entirely sure these moves are played perfectly, but to be fair, they had like 30 seconds on the clock. There's going to be a little bit of shuffling, but really, there's just nothing really that Black can do. There's some little, hopes, and of course, obviously, Black knows that the game is kind of technically over, but there's still some practical chances. Maybe he'll flag, maybe he'll blunder the queen back. You don't know if you resign. So especially in speed chess, very people will resign. They'll just play it out, and it's only like 40 seconds left on the clock. I like this move. This bishop was pinning the knight, and just gets out of the pin. Do we need to get out of the pin? No, but why would you want to stay in the pin? So that definitely makes sense. Okay, a tempo on the queen, whatever. Just save the queen. Okay, activating the rook. Let's say, trying to make something happen here, but really it's just nothing's gonna happen. That knight loves hopping back and forth, threatening this pawn. The king tries to protect it, and f4 is played. I mean, f4 is a move that you play when there's no time on the clock. It's a maybe not the best move, but it's more than enough to get the job done, since White is dominating this position. b5, an attempt to do something on the queen side, makes sense. g4, not a big fan of playing pawn moves on the side of the board where our king is, but it probably is just a really good move, objectively speaking. It's gonna completely snuff this bishop. It's gonna just squish him, and yeah, this is just wrapping up. So let's just see how it finishes. e6 obviously attacking the knight, and then instead of moving the knight, I really like this idea, just counterplay, hitting the bishop, it moves, and now the bishop is completely buried by this pawn, by this knight. Well played. Like, White might really just converted this quite easily. Okay, just push past there. Knight g4, I don't really know what the idea of knight g4 is, but I imagine it just has to do with that there's like 20 seconds on the clock or whatever. So we can't really say too much about these moves. I like this move because it kind of sets up exactly what happened in the game. Yeah, if you take this pawn, there's just rook c7 or queen a7, and it's a double attack on the king and the rook, and okay, just disaster. Rook c3 was played instead, but it's the same deal. Rook a7 picks up the rook, check. He drops back. So obviously, or she drops back, attacking the queen. Just save the queen, no big deal. And then I really like this kind of finisher, just to open up the position, to trade the pawns. If you kind of look, this king is only alive because this pawn is sort of blocking the entrance for this rook. So we're just gonna get rid of it. Let's c4. It's a great move. Knight c3. We're up by so much material. It's just not even a factor. And actually, white is just basically playing perfectly. There's a pin, and d6 is attacking the pinned piece. It's okay. It's just over. To king e8 check. Oh, instead of giving this check, they just took the rook. Okay. It's obviously a winning move. There's threat of checkmate in 1. Bishop takes e5 is just a move because, you know, it's a move. And I was actually a little bit surprised that queen e7 wasn't played in the game. And actually want to say I would give bonus points if someone found queen c8 as the alternative checkmate in 1. Just because it's a little bit less obvious to play queen c8, and I think that gets a little bit of bonus points. Both sides played really well, and it's a little bit unfortunate, although kind of it's the nature of these speed games, that b6 was sort of, you know, if it was played online, to be a misclick. And here it's not really clear if the move had to be played, considering the clock wasn't pressed. But in any case, the game was extremely well played by both sides, barring just this one blunder. So what's the lesson? I'm not sure. Speed chess is tough, and yeah, I hope I really enjoyed seeing this fun game, and hope you guys join me for the next time. All right, bye.